All right, folks, here are once again at MSP Confidential, and we have a wonderful guest today, Karl Fulljames from Nucleus Networks. We're at IT Nation Connect here in Orlando, and I managed to snag Karl literally right off the expo hall floor this morning to jump into this conversation with me, because we were having a conversation about building client value, and I thought it was an interesting topic. Well, first of all, welcome. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. My feet are going to fall off, but thank you for having me. It's nice to sit for a minute.
Yes, lots of hours on our feet. Our lower backs start to complain, and so...
Lots of Advil.
Well, yeah, indeed. Back to this client value topic, which I think is so interesting. I think a lot of what happens in the early stage of building an MSP is just trying to figure out what the right tool to do things with is. And maybe we'll get into a bit of the shiny object syndrome and how that evolves over time as you're running a larger org and have to be a little bit more judicious with your evaluations of products, the process by which you deploy them internally, and then also, I guess, to the point of today's topic, how you kind of think backwards from building client value with those tools. I mean, what's your high level thought, first of all, and then maybe we'll unpack it from there.
Yeah, we've always been about what's the user actually getting and what's the company getting out of what they're paying for, and trying to remove barriers to buying into our services and the things we're offering. And if they're going to be paying for something, they better be getting something out for return. So if we're going to be putting in like a chat service and it's going to end up increasing our fee somehow, hopefully it doesn't, is there actually value to them, or is it only to us? And hopefully there's something that in there that is value to the end user, to the companies that are subscribing to our services, that makes it easier for them to do their business, to get back to work and doing what they want. Because nobody actually wants to talk to us, right? They only talk to us when things break or if there's a big change and they need some help. Ideally, they can just go about their business and make money. And it's our job to enable that. And so what do they need? And sometimes, or quite often, they don't know what they should be doing around security, especially these days. What should they be doing or thinking about when it comes to security, AI, SASE, terms that clients don't know about, and maybe they're asking for those services. And then how do you put these things together? And especially at a trade show like this, you could buy every vendor out there and still not be able to answer the actual problems that the clients are having. So trying to figure out, what's the best, not just value for us, but what are the clients actually asking for? Sometimes what they're asking for might actually be fairly expensive, but it's what they really need. And other times, we might be really taken with something that is of no value to them whatsoever.
Right.
So
you kind of have to catch yourself in the process. And you're like, well, this is a shiny object, obviously, and so how do you stop the organization from doing that?
Yeah, it's like just because it makes my life easier, is there actually any return for the client? And it's not about us, it's about the client.
What's the client feedback process like in that scenario of exploring the possibility of a new tool? Because there's maybe a lot of assumptions made through the internal evaluation process, but do you actually go out now and get feedback from clients on some of these shifts in the packaging of services?
Yeah, and we also look at their tickets. Any organization will probably get to the point where not everyone knows what the other departments are doing or what they're suffering from. And so by actually looking at the metrics and the tickets and what their problems are, their common problems are across departments and maybe even across sectors or all of our client base, we can come back with some suggestions they maybe haven't thought of yet. But not so egotistical to say that we're going to know all that. We still need their feedback, and we need to know what they're looking for and what they're hearing about. Sometimes it's whatever they've heard about in the news, big war going on, cybersecurity is an issue, what are we going to do about it? That one's a real easy one that comes up quite a bit. Not easy to answer, but an easy conversation to have. And there's a real concern around there, and different clients are at different stages of their maturity when it comes to cybersecurity, and how do we create like a ladder for them to work their way up?
Sure.
So what's the base level that they should be at? Then what's the next rung, and then eventually what's the end game? And I remember chatting with, I forgot his name, he used to be a data scientist at Bank of America, but he was talking about almost like a bingo card. You could actually buy a product for every category and still not get it right. Yeah. And so how do you actually answer these questions, either on a framework, which you have to rely on some frameworks so you're checking the right boxes, buy a product for everything. You just need to make sure you cover, left of boom, right of boom, and then assets, people, and all of it comes down to people.
So this is an interesting layer of the things that you make decisions on based on data you know.
Yeah.
Obviously, I guess it's a reactive decision process in a way, but there's also that layer of the things that you're trying to uncover that the client doesn't even know potentially, and that you don't necessarily have a solution for. Talk to me a little bit through that process, because I think you guys are large enough now that your VCIOs have a much deeper level of conversation with clients, are getting really into the intricacies of how all the moving parts of their business might be missing innovation pieces or technology pieces. And you may not always have a package or product or service for those things. And so how does that factor into sort of this, building client value? And I say that because I think that's one area where clients perceive a lot of value, is the MSP is really involved in helping them solve for future problems.
Yeah. Some clients are going to become public at some point. They want to know what's the roadmap to get there. And so we have our VCIO, or we call them client success team. And we also have a separate team, which is more of a virtual CISO team. And so they can walk clients through, could be various frameworks, CIS, SOC 2, helping them get ready for those types of executions and getting them up to the point where they can then pass those audits. We're not the auditor, but we're going to help them get there.
Yeah.
And those have led to some very interesting conversations. We're just completing our SOC 2 ourselves, and we've learned a lot through that as well. And the questions the auditors are looking for is interesting, right? Because they want to check a box, but they don't necessarily know the industry the company's in. But yeah, back to your question, there's a lot coming out when it comes to AI. We've looked at Copilot, mixed success on the buy-in on that. Teams Premium seems to be, more of the current value, and Copilot's great if you want to create documents, but merging them, not so hot. So that's come up quite a bit. But typically we're not getting a technical question. We're getting, we're closing our offices and everyone's going to be remote. What do we do?
Right.
Or we're going to be moving offices and we're going to be opening up a location in Europe, and we've had power outages and we're worried about that. What do we do now? What should we do for a plan? And so those ones are, they're a little more 2D. You're not playing chess with those ones, but it's a little easier to come up with an answer. But if you have something where maybe there's been a really unique security breach either to that company or to that sector, and the company is worried about that, that can really spin off into a number of conversations. And then you're back to, maybe let's talk about some frameworks, right? Maybe this is something we should talk about and find a way to walk you through that. And maybe that'll lead you to the answer that you're looking for.
Sure. So you mentioned you're going through your SOC 2 process.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting shift that happens from a culture perspective to get everybody in that mindset of security or process or policy. And I'm curious to, whatever you can share of what that evolution has been a little bit internally.
It's a lot more work than, I knew it was going to be a lot of work, but still more than you expect. And I definitely over-prepared on the technical side. And when it came to that, we got to the point of going through things with the auditor, and we finished everything in like 3 days. And we had that nailed. And then it's the process and job descriptions and making sure all that side was actually covered. Not going to say we got called out on it, but where we had a little bit more work to do than we thought we did. We thought we had all the job descriptions in the right place, and maybe it wasn't quite the way the auditor wanted it to be written. Or
Interesting.
Our meeting minutes, they wanted a different structure on the meeting minutes. Little things I didn't really consider. But then, we had procedures and policies for what we thought was critical to the business, but it opened us up to other policies we needed to consider. Not only our own data retention, but our clients' data retention. How long should we keep their data if a user leaves?
Right.
And if it happens to be on our servers, or a client leaves and we want to have an agreement that after X number of days we're going to delete your data. So don't expect it after that. But we're also not going to keep it forever and put us at a liability risk. One of the biggest things that's been, I guess, eye-opening for me is if there is a breach to, say, an HR system, and you have X employees' data in there, the company could be liable to then have to notify the X employees in a certain amount of time. And if you don't have their contact information or know where they are, you could be in hot water. And so it's a lot of it's cleaning up your data and making sure you know where it is, of course, but also making sure that there's the right policies to keep it clean monthly, not just like once a year or quarterly. Some of these things we have to prove monthly. The number of policies we've had to write has been a lot, and some of them are technical, encryption, backup policies, the usual things that you'd expect to have, but then also making sure you're testing certain things more often than maybe we were doing before. And then some things that we thought maybe would be more important, like doing an antivirus test or testing out the SOC, didn't come up. We still do them, and I have a separate set of frameworks for that. But some of those things I would expect, to call in, see if they're going to change my password if it's not me calling, right? And how do you verify the end user? So those are all things that
CTO, fun CTO things.
Things I thought the auditor would be asking that they didn't. And it's also been really interesting to educate the auditor on what ZTNA is versus VPN. And sometimes they're really up to speed, and other times, a little education back and forth has been really helpful, I think, for both of us.
ZTNA for all our American friends. Maybe an abstract nuance of maybe the compliance process, and I think clients maybe struggle to see the value of compliance unless they have a specific need right away.
Yeah.
But what's interesting that I see MSPs that start down the compliance path, it becomes a really good standard to kind of drive the relationship by. But it might be a struggle to get the clients that don't have a requirement to come on board with the business need.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question is around this idea of do you see compliance as a business function more than a technical function? And it's interesting because I think MSPs are relegated, all the security stuff, compliance stuff kind of sounds and feels like IT and is relegated to IT. But there's this maybe realm of business process knowledge that everybody has to kind of come to terms with during that.
Yeah, that's true, because we get requests all the time. Hey, we've been told that we need to have a document that outlines our acceptable use policy. Like, well, we're not the law firm. We can give you a template, but or help you with a template, but you need your lawyer involved with that. So those are the types of conversations that come up quite a bit, and usually it's insurance-based. Yeah. Our insurance is saying we need this, or we thought we had this, and we actually don't. And then trying to work through that and make sure they have what they need. Typically, maybe not typical, but some businesses, they only want to do the bare minimum so they can get the check mark and move on. Others are heavily invested in actually revamping the organization to make sure that they don't have people buying gift cards and wasting company money anymore.
You mean iTunes gift cards to send to the CEO who sent a text message?
Right? Yeah, exactly. iTunes, Amazon. I haven't seen Steam yet, but I'd sure love to get some of those. All the way down to we need to have a whistleblower policy.
Right.
We've been asked about that, and there are services for that, but it's not necessarily needed. Sometimes we're asked to come in on the business process side, and that can sometimes be gray area. It's just like, we don't support fax machines, but they still call us for help on them. They'll call us for acceptable use policies because it touches a computer. They think we need to be involved. We're happy to be involved, and we'd prefer to be in those conversations rather than just rely on it elsewhere. It's not like there's nothing clear cut.
Yeah,
it's a lot of gray area.
Well, on that topic, maybe has there been a particularly interesting adjacent thing that came up where you didn't expect you'd ever be involved in helping with that particular thing, but suddenly it was actually an interesting thing to facilitate because of your knowledge of technology, or even your experience of helping other businesses through the business process of it?
Yeah, I think. Just going through the list of administrators with a company you work with in a co-managed situation where they have internal staff and we have our own staff, accountability is a big thing for us and being proven through SOC 2, and it's one of our core values. But making sure we know who's doing what, and we have really clear lines as to not only who's doing what, but who's responsible for what.
Right.
And that's come up more often than not as of late. If we both have access to something, who's responsible for making those changes, and if and whose change process are we following? Is it the client's or is it ours? And we follow the client's change process, and we're there to help them and support them with their processes. But a lot of companies, that's been, as they're maturing, they're realizing it's not our process, it's theirs, and we're only there to support their process. So we've actually been there for helping them establish all their policies from our vCISO team. And there's a lot of templates, thankfully, and that's come up a lot in a whistleblower. Having conversations about whistleblower policies is not something I'd ever thought I'd have with a client, and help them figure out who should be getting that call. I'm trying to think what else, but
I'm sure there's plenty of examples.
There's lots, hundreds.
Maybe a little tangential to building client value, but still kind of an important part of the process of a tech stack discussion internally. From when you were a smaller team to now the current size, what's the process like internally when somebody raises their hand and says, hey, I think we need this tool to do this thing? And I get that some of the things are going to be internal in nature, below the line, so to speak, just a cost of the business. Has an interesting process evolved and appeared to help people or push back on them to drive a little bit of the business driver for that request and how they think about it?
Yeah, everything has to be backed by some sort of metric. What's the value of it, and the cost, of course. But usually when I'm speaking with a vendor, I have to actually just pause and figure out where they are on security before I get too far with them.
Right.
So have they passed their SOC 2? Or do they have ISO 27001 or something else? And if not, how far are you in that process? Before I get too interested and really want your product, I want to make sure we check some of those policies off. But we actually have a whole vendor selection process. And let's take an example like privileged access management. So what's the value of it? And is it something other people are doing or looking at adopting? And what's the value to the client? And a lot of that might not be necessarily something that we can charge for, but does it help us sleep better at night? Does it reduce our risk? Like if we get attacked, what does that mean to our client?
Right.
Where's the liability? And so a lot of my decisions lately have been looking more about what's our liability and how we limit that and make sure that us and our clients are safer. One breach could take out us and we'd never be around anymore.
Yeah.
And nobody wants that. So how do we make sure that we're more secure, and is that an effective strategy to make sure that we can continue to operate as a business? And so looking at some tools that way has been really helpful, as well as, we're seeing, maybe mail security isn't as hot as it used to be from Microsoft, and maybe that needs an expansion. That's something I'm considering right now. And do I want to look at more filtering? Is that an answer, or is it more banners to the end user? I'm sure you've seen the comic where it's a boxing ring, and there's all the security tools on one side and Bob from finance on the other, and he's defeating every tool that's out there. And so we have to work on both. Nothing's a technical problem. It's usually a resourcing and a people problem. How do we get them the information so they know what they should be doing and what they should be clicking on? And one conversation we had yesterday that was really interesting is by giving so many, crutches to the user with so many banners and things, one, are they going to start ignoring them? And two, are we making it that they're less fearful of clicking on things? So now they're just going to click on everything and expect that if there's no banner, it's going to be 100% safe. And on one side, we have to wear seatbelts, now everyone's going to drive faster. Maybe not. But we're trying to
security.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out what that balance is right now and what the right process is.
So as you're talking through a bit of the comment on the liability and maybe a very dramatic shift in focus of your role from when you expected it to be maybe, I get to play with all the shiny tools. What's been that evolution for you as a CTO? Sort of, did it kind of creep up on you? Suddenly one day you just found yourself talking about liability and things most of the time? Or did you see a specific inflection point of that based on a big company initiative like SOC 2 could maybe drive a bit of that change of focus?
I think there's some of that's always been there, right? Do our clients are they backed up? Are their servers backed up? Are they staying backed up? And are we backing up the right volumes? It's one thing to say you have the backup of the server, but are we backing up the right things on that server? And so that's always been an issue. And then I was worried about, all right, I'm in control.
Yeah, only the boot drive was selected.
Yeah, exactly. And we've been there. But then does our tier one have the right access? Do they have too much access? What happens if they get breached? And then, it's those things where I was sitting there, and those are the things that keep me up at night. So then, how do I start addressing that so I can sleep better? That really is kind of the piece of it. But that creeps into other areas. And with the advancements of technology, especially in the enterprise space, that's starting to come down, we can start limiting who has access to what, and also implementing just in time. So you don't need to have full access all the time. You only need access when you need it, and then it's turned off. And in order to get access again, you have to probably two-factor authentication a half dozen times to get back in. I feel pretty good about that, right? It's something that I don't have to worry too much about. It's not going to say it's always solved, but it certainly, the barrier to breach us is going to be a lot higher than we were maybe even 6 months or a year ago. And so, if you're making yourself a less likely target, it's better. I think the ZTNA we were talking about earlier, limiting a lot of things in our portals so that they aren't exposed publicly. You have to first connect in, be authenticated, and then you can get to the login portal. So it means that a lot of the things we log into aren't even exposed to the internet. So again, it's a less likely target. So just trying to find ways to make it harder to see us has been a big change over the last couple of years.
There's maybe a marketing slogan here. If Karl is sleeping better at night, your business is more secure.
Sleep, yeah. Although, I know wearing this thing, I definitely got some pain I'm working with. Yeah.
I can't be replaced, but my hip sure can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another problem. But on the security side and the work side, making sure that less things to worry about at night certainly helps a lot.
Back to this culture question a little bit, because obviously you're squarely thinking about all these things, and that is part of the role. But I think you have to bring a lot of people along in that journey. What's that been like just from a personal journey perspective? I think that's an interesting thing that CTOs often find themselves maybe battling a lot of battles, just trying to get people to even agree that we should be doing this as an organization type of thing.
Yeah, I don't think battle's the right word. We have a IT leadership committee that we meet with. It's part of SOC 2. We've rebranded it to match that, where we talk about what's the help desk seeing, what's project team seeing, what's the CISO team seeing, what's the reporting from clients, what am I hearing at conferences? I love spending time in the pavilion and just hearing what vendors are talking about and hearing what questions are being asked. Make sure I'm listening to all that is the most important part for me of coming to these things so I can continue to learn. And so if I'm looking at I'm not bringing in a product, I'm bringing in a vision, and these are the products that fit that.
Right.
So if I'm looking at accountability, as an example, I can combine products to have like a change log so I can see, all right, this change on this firewall was made at this time, but now I want to see who made it. So I need to make sure that it's not a generic admin account. I need an actual user. Okay, so how do I get a product or a service of something that makes sure that I have an actual username there without having 600 admin accounts at every client, which is going to fail every audit. And piecing that together and creating this vision and then sharing that with the IT leadership committee, I haven't found a battle. It's like, yeah, this answers the question, or have you thought about this as well? And it helps me ask better questions. Yeah. And from back to your early question, when we were 14 people, I was expected to come up with all the answers. Now I feel like I'm expected to come up with the better questions. And it's not necessarily me to answer them, it's to come up with the good questions and then see how do we answer those questions together as a team. And then, I have to come to these things and find what's going to fit. But once I bring that back, I'm usually not the only person that's excited about it. It's like, oh yeah, you know what? That's been really bothering me and I hadn't realized it yet. Or this has been a problem we've had forever, right, and we just didn't know how to answer it before. So yeah, it hasn't really been, so within our company, it hasn't been a battle. It's been more of like a sharing of ideas and questions, so that we're answering the right questions and asking the right ones.
Yeah. What's your favorite question to ask?
Oh, geez.
And I know there's,
Yeah, I mean, on the security side, I have it's a terrible name, but a cybersecurity maturity ladder, and it rhymes too much. But I want to know what's on that bottom rung. Like, what's our minimum level of security that we're willing to accept? Because clients, whether they know it or not, they're actually transferring their liability of IT to us, and that's really what they're paying for. And we have to keep their systems available, of course, and help them. But what they're paying for is actually some of that transfer liability. And so what's that minimum level of risk that we're able to accept and that we think our client should be at as well? And the tough part about that one is trying to figure out what's going to work for 99% of clients. And then the level up from that, okay, so maybe you have MFA and you have an MDR for endpoint and MDR for 365. Okay, maybe that's our minimum, right? Maybe a few other things in there. What's the next level up? And then the highest level is probably having a forensic team on retainer. There's a lot of gap between that, right? And a lot of spend difference. So I spend a lot of time talking with the team about what's that minimum level of security, and then how do we, as we're growing as well, how do we make sure that we're giving a unified security delivery to all of our clients so that there's no difference between clients, right? They have the same, they all have the same expectation, and we need to be delivering on that. So how do we make sure we don't have a weird exception in conditional access over here that shouldn't exist when it's set up everywhere else okay? How do we make sure we're backing up all the right volumes for all clients, not just one?
Are you finding with this evolution of your own ladder, so to speak, or the baseline that you're willing to accept, that your minimum client size per headcount, for example, is also shifting ever so slightly? And I asked that question because before the big conversation around cybersecurity, people would say, oh, we have a 15 user minimum because the math doesn't work otherwise. Right. But none of that really factored in cybersecurity to a majority extent. But I think that's changed a lot now.
Yeah. What the SMBs are asking for is more enterprise level offerings. They all word it a little bit differently, but their expectation is that they're getting a certain level of security. And so we are seeing, there are some clients that have that left that didn't value security, and we've had a lot of challenges with them in that area. But some are really small and some are a decent size. And I don't necessarily think it's the size of the client. I think it's more the maturity.
Sure.
And so you might have a 120 or 140 person firm that they just want the absolute bare minimum, what's going to get them by. They're not using IT in a strategic way to grow their business. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But our level of risk is at a different level than what they're at. And that can become a sticking point. And we don't want to send waivers for people to sign, but sometimes we have to.
Yeah.
And those can become a friction point. So we have seen, there's been some change up of clients, but we've also seen newer clients that are coming on board that are smaller, that really do value those things and have no problem signing on. I remember a report from ConnectWise a few years ago where they said the average SMB was willing to pay X number of percent more if they felt their security was being taken seriously. And so I use that as some validation that we are going the right direction, right? We need to make sure we have somebody watching, not just us, but our clients. And I wanted to be an outside SOC maintaining that for us, and they're watching things on Christmas morning if I'm sleeping in. Or every holiday. That's when the big hackers hit, right? Right when a holiday is starting, and so that there's fewer people watching, and so that's why we have an outside SOC to watch that and maintain that for us, and then wake us up if we need to.
One of my favorite recent expressions is "success is a terrible teacher," and so maybe I wanted to ask you if there's been a client value creation failure, perhaps that helped you actually learn and pivot something significantly inside the business.
That's a good question. I mean, I think we've been asking really good questions along the way to make sure we're not jumping into something too soon. We've looked at, there's been some
Yeah,
products.
like trying not to solve problems that don't exist yet.
Yeah. Or we'll try out a product for an extended period of time before we're introducing it to clients. And we found some that are incredibly noisy, and the noise outweighs the value of the product. And those have been some that were like, we just can't, like, if it's too noisy for just us, one company, what's it going to do for the other 200? We're not going to be able to actually maintain it properly. And so the value is gone. And we eventually get to the point where that's just not going to be a fit for us. And then, maybe that's something that's going to sit as an open gap until we can solve it later. We try not to, I think there's been, in the past years, there's been some products we've tried that, tested out really well, especially in the backup space. And then as soon as we got to scale, it just wasn't working. Backup products that said they were successful and we tested they weren't. And, we're halfway down a 1,000-hour project and we just have to pivot and get to a product that's actually going to work. And those are things we don't charge clients for. But that's probably the biggest failure we had, was a backup product that appeared to be mature, and as we were rolling it out, it became very clear it wasn't. And doing test restores were failing, even though it was green lights across the board. And so, that really hurt. You're 500 hours in to something you can't bill, expecting it to be what you're going to be sitting on for the next decade, and all of a sudden you have to pivot and make that really hard decision because it's not doing anyone any favors.
Yeah. So decision making, you're giving me the best segues here, because you drop these awesome little knowledge sound bites. Decision making is an interesting one, because I find also smaller businesses tend to be a little bit more cautious in their decision making, or maybe less pragmatic, I guess is a way to say it. And the thing I notice a lot about the MSPs that are fast growing is that their leadership is quite pragmatic. They get away from the whole sunken cost theory. Yeah. It's like, if this is not working, we got to move off it immediately. And but I see others kind of dwell on that decision. Yeah. What's been your experience in that shift of decision making inside the business?
Yeah, twofold. One, we don't want to shift products that often. Like, if it's not broken, why are you fixing it? Even if there's small headaches, you need to prioritize. You need to make sure that whatever you're doing fits your company values, right? And accountability is a big one. So I need to make sure that we can be accountable for the products we're rolling out, and that internally the accountability and documentation's in place, and we know how to support it. Talking with clients, it's a different conversation with a small business, a really small business, when it's their money that's on the line, and that conversation is very different from a nonprofit or a much bigger organization where it's a budget discussion. It's not their money. Both of them very valid discussions, and you have to be prepared to answer both types of questions. I've seen, it's not always about emotion either. I have seen people at large organizations with budgets that are very emotional about the decision, and small businesses that are, I guess, more on the rational side and more understanding of what you're going for. But it's been, you might have a conversation with the company saying, I'm already paying for business insurance, why do I need a backup server? Because I'm already paying for this. This is just more insurance. Aren't you just selling me more insurance? It's like, well, no, but they're also going to ask for it. And those can be tough conversations to go through. But yeah, it's that maturity thing. And I've always felt the types of businesses you're working with have to be in the same, I guess there's a range, but somewhere in that range of your own maturity for it to be a really good mix.
I have talked about that a little bit, like the maturity, the operational maturity level of the client versus the MSP. They can't be too far apart in either direction. Yeah, because there's going to be some gaps that are created either way. So I find that to be interesting. Now, I know you guys do a ton of compliance with many of your clients. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to understand a bit of the difference in the relationship with the clients that are doing compliance versus the ones that are not. Either one of those might be ready for compliance or need it, but I'm curious if the discussion or conversation is elevated with the compliance customers versus the ones that are more IT-centric things?
It can be. There's a company we work with where they have a number of sub-organizations, and working with them, the decision was made that let's get everyone on CIS. Let's get everyone and all the sub-companies so we know that our investments are safe, that we're okay, and the investments in these sub-companies that we own are also at that same level, which makes sense, right? Like, it's the same as making sure your kids have the key to the house and the alarm code to get in when they need to. And they're not going to hand that code out to anybody else, right? That's something I've had to go through. The conversation does change, and it's not always about framework, and it's not always about CIS. Sometimes it's, well, let's build out like a 3 to 5 year plan, and it'll involve other companies like ERP. It's not something we do. We can help direct them and help guide them, but it's their decision, and it's their technology and their company. But it's more of a almost agnostic approach to IT. What are you trying to accomplish, or where are you planning to be at this stage? And then more away from the vCIO or the client success side, it's more helping with the budgeting, the full budgeting, not just the small piece. What are you going to do for ERP and the servers and cloud, and how's all that going to work out? And then how do you make sure that your security is being maintained by these third-party providers? And that's something I think is a big piece. That's the difference, because we're not managing their vendors, but we are there to make sure they're asking the questions too.
Sure.
And so if they're going to be picking an ERP vendor, we're helping them, prepping them with some questions and a different way of thinking things, and a baseline that they can establish. It's been interesting.
Do you find, and maybe this happens less so as a larger MSP now, where you have much broader set of services and things you can offer clients, but have you ever had your toes stepped on by other parties that are maybe adjacent to IT in some kind of way? And the example I want to give you is, I hear lots of stories about CA firms that are in the boardroom, and they see all this opportunity in IT, and they buy an MSP, and suddenly the clients that had a different MSP that they're in the boardroom with, now they can displace that other MSP. And the displacement happens largely at the commoditized level. Yeah. And so I asked the question because maybe some of your clients are not the elevated compliance discussion necessarily, and it's more of a risk of displacement because of the commoditization. But I'm curious if you've seen a bit of your toes being stepped on by either insurance that's partnering up with cybersecurity firms to do random vulnerability scans, or a CA firm or an ERP software that comes in and can also offer a whole slew of IT level services.
We've seen that. I think more commonly it's a merger.
I'm losing you to the side.
Oh, side,
yeah. Come on, to get closer.
I think we've seen that when companies merge. Maybe there's an IT department over here, and then there's us, an IT director on this side, and trying to make sure that we're working with them and not against them. I think is.
Oh, Ronald dropped us a line here.
Hey, Ronald.
Yeah, what do you see as a challenge for SMB clients to be brought up to minimum standard that your firm wants them to?
Yeah, it's that whole vision of. And that discussion around risk, what's the minimum that we're willing to accept, and why? You have to lead with why. If you're just coming in with products, they don't care.
Yeah, and I also find there's a level of clients will do whatever you let them. And so when you come in and you haven't really, if you're not opinionated about some of these things, they will flex your the boundaries of your limits or your baselines necessarily. So
we've seen companies come in and definitely challenge us on the services. So maybe they agree with the vision, and they agree that these things need to be in place, but maybe they don't want our products. That's okay. Just because we've picked something, I like being challenged because it makes me think a little bit more about, maybe I should be looking at that. And we've seen that in the past where we maybe picked a workstation backup product that was different than what we were using because the client's one was actually better. Sometimes it's not that case, right? And having to, it's not a fight. It's more of a discussion and an explanation of what are you trying to get out of this. We've seen some people bring in a software product that would manage security around 365 that's well in excess of $25 a user a month. And like, okay, let's go through the trial with you. And we'll do this together, and we'll set it up, and we'll get the reports, and we'll meet with you and the vendor and see what you're getting out of it. And sometimes that flames out pretty hard. And then compare that to what we're offering at a much lower price. I think one thing that's I've been talking about lately with a couple clients is what is the average IT spend on an enterprise? Because sometimes that's between $25 and $80 American per user per month in an enterprise just on security. So what are we offering? And it's essentially like a budget version of that.
Sure.
And are we checking the same boxes? And so it is helpful to step out of the industry and see what is an enterprise company with 20,000 users doing, and what are the boxes they're checking. And sometimes it's shocking what they aren't including in that.
Right.
And sometimes they're starting to touch in some areas like SASE, like 4 or 5 years ago. Something that I hadn't. That makes a lot of sense. It's not something I'd considered before, and I got to keep an eye on that and see when that's going to come to market. And I don't think it's had saturation yet. And part of that I think is due to price. But there are some offerings now in this space that would make a lot of sense. Doesn't make sense for everybody, but I think there are some that could benefit from that.
So we got distracted there when you went off frame.
Sorry.
And you were about to ask the question, or you answered the question that I had asked about, do you find your toes being stepped on by adjacent to IT type of businesses that are talking to your clients in the boardroom to some extent?
Yeah. We have seen it from pen test firms, and I think the biggest conversation that's come up is a disagreement around passwords. And thankfully NIST was updated this year. They want longer passwords, they don't want them rotated, and they also don't want special characters. They want it more of a passphrase that a user can remember, and that's their recommendation. It's been Microsoft's recommendation for a number of years, and it's what we're moving ahead with. They feel that if you require special characters, it's just going to be like this morning. Tony Hawk's password was skate 900 with an exclamation. Next year, it's going to be skate 901 with an exclamation, right? And it's not actually making it more secure. And that's been findings from multiple organizations. And some auditors and some of these CA firms they want password rotation on the regular.
Yeah.
And so most of the conversations we've had in that has been around password policies and the why, and having like the latest NIST recommendations to go away from that has been helpful as not only a piece for the CA firm to consider, but also the client to be like, okay, that's the why, and that actually makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And maybe let's do a one password reset and then adopt these new policies, right? There's more than one way to skin that cat. So.
Yeah, we've had those conversations too, and I think we've been able to, with that kind of documentation, and one of the first ones to do with the UK Center for Cybersecurity, we're the first to kind of get on board of this idea of like, hey, rotating passwords is actually not so secure. But then we see some of the vendors becoming very opinionated about it, like when Microsoft specifically started requiring automatic password changes from within their product. But then there's the gap that is created from the people that already had an insecure password to begin with. So you got to obviously build and account for some of those things. And I find that fascinating. That's exactly where IT plays an important role.
And the auditor's looking for, well, what's the setting? But just because you change the setting doesn't mean it's affected the old users.
Right.
And they're not checking that. And working through all of that with somebody, it's not just about the audit and making sure the auditor is happy. That's a huge component of it, but what's actually best for the business. There's a reason why you're going through the audit, and it's to grow your business, not because you really want to be secure and you really enjoy having your company have a piece of paper. You're getting it so you can probably go after new types of business or retain business that is now requiring it of you. And it's just like going to buy a car with a pre-authorized audit from the car dealership saying we've already checked everything's good, it's less to worry about. And so that's how we're looking at SOC 2, and let's be pragmatic about it, adopt the things that really matter, and also make sure we're doing good for the auditor.
Let's pull out the crystal ball for a sec because that's always a fun discussion.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if how far ahead you're trying to maybe think of technology changes and AI is a good example of something that we're just starting to get a base level understanding of the potential challenges in the future for it. But there might be other things that you're thinking about, especially since you have this focus on building client value. You kind of have to put yourself in the shoes of the client a little bit and not so much, cover the MSP side of it. But
Yeah, I think, very early on when Copilot was first launched, there's a lot of discussion like, hey, we want to try it. And then some companies tried it and it's like, well, it's not as hot as we thought it was going to be.
it fizzles a bit.
And then like, okay, well, what are you trying to get out of it? And a lot of the companies are like, well, I don't know. We just thought it would do more. It would do work for us. Now, there's certainly departments it works really well for. But there's also, I think Google's been pushing back and they're detecting AI created marketing content and devaluing that in SEOs. And so trying to find the right place for things is, and what are you trying to get out of it rather than trying to pick the technology first. So, I mean, going forward, I think that accountability piece is big. I don't think there's a lot of MSPs that are working on just-in-time access and really taking that accountability as seriously as they should. And I think every MSP should level up. Any one MSP gets in the news, that's bad for all of us. And I think if all of us can level up to the point where we're all thought of as a very secure type of outsourced provider, that's going to be better for all of us. So, some of the challenges we do get when we're working on new business is, should we be giving you guys admin rights? And we're rarely talking about what's the product we're using. It's more, what's the outcome?
Sure.
And so if a business is really wanting to, maybe, and what are they worried about? So, some businesses are really worried about the next SolarWinds attack or anything like that, where downstream, their vendors are being attacked, and that the product updates are certified by them and working their way in as a Trojan horse, and now siphoning out data, but no AV is picking it up or EDR or anything. So what do you do about that? And that's tricky. And there's only so much we can do. We're not auditing everyone else, but you can do our part by making sure we are checking for the right security standards and make sure they're ISO 27001, SOC 2, and actually reading those reports, not just saying, cool, I got it, done.
Right. And
finding what the auditor's finding. There's a lot to think about.
So we're at a conference, we're at IT Nation Connect, and I think people that come to conferences, if it's their first time, they very quickly realize the importance of community. Or they've been in digital communities, the MSP geeks of the world, that kind of stuff. And I'm curious sort of what community things you take from being at these events, and what are some of your favorite conversations to have in the hallway track, as I call it?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, this is, I think, my 12th or 13th time here. And I now know which sessions are recorded, so I can watch them later, versus being in the pavilion and talking to people. And so I definitely prefer to be in the pavilions, talking to people, understanding what questions are being asked, like I mentioned before. And then in the hallways, there's a few people that know me, and I've had people come up to me even today saying, hey, I was talking to someone, they said I should ask you about this problem. And while I am helping them and helping them maybe get some direction on where they're going, it's also triggering in me like, well, have we dealt with that problem? And maybe I have a client that's actually asked about something similar, and maybe I need to think more about that if someone else is also having the same problem. So it's a correlation of data. And I think that is really important. And then also building that network so that when I get back, like, oh, I should have asked that person that question. I completely forgot. At least now I know how that person's contact. I can ask them again. Or I know someone that can maybe point me in the right direction to talk to somebody. Not necessarily a vendor. It could just be another MSP that is going through something. Maybe they're in Australia or New Zealand, but they were talking about something similar that they're having a challenge with, and we're not there yet. Maybe they're much bigger and we're growing to that space. or a much smaller MSP that's having a struggle that we've already been through. But then I clue in that, we have clients that are that size too, and they're struggling with the same thing. So what can we do, based on that question, should we have, and not everything costs money. Sometimes it's just a conversation and making sure that a decision is made. So circling away from that question a little bit, I want to make sure that if there's a gap, that we've talked about it, and at least it's being accepted. So you can't solve everything, but let's say you have we've had a client say that we need you to guarantee us that we will never be breached. Well, the answer to that is turn off your internet and go offline. And don't have a computer, right?
Yeah, we're backwards from there a little bit.
Yeah. So that's not anything we can guarantee. So, okay, you're accepting that risk. How much risk are you able to accept? And then what you're not able to accept to make sure we're addressing that.
Sure. Yeah. I think we have one more question from Ronald. Let's see. What is your opinion about some vendors having a one-stop shop approach in their security offering? And I think what you're probably referring to, Ronald, is like, we solve everything. We'll prevent every breach. And I think this is a common annoyance by the people in the space when vendors do that, because we understand that it's not a matter of if, but when in many respects. Yeah. But your comment on that?
I think, twofold. It is a when, and then how do they address it? What are they messaging publicly?
Yeah, the resiliency.
Are they being honest about it? Or is the story changing every week? We saw that from a password manager a few years ago where, it seemed like every day there's a different story and we weren't getting the full truth, and that lost me more trust than another company that was breached and said, yep, this is what happened, this is what we did, this is what we're doing moving forward. Or, hey, we were breached and we don't know everything yet. And then, a week later, okay, this is what happened, this is how we addressed it, this is our failing, and this is what we're doing going forward. And that transparency is really big with me. What was the rest of the question? So one-stop shop, it's, you see some products, and there's a remote control software here that is also offering PAM, privileged access management. And it looks great on paper, but they're not addressing Entra. They're only doing the endpoint. So it seems like a lot of these are jack of all trades, master of none. Maybe they can do 60% of everything. I certainly want, if I'm going into a PAM solution where I'm doing just-in-time access, I need not just endpoint, I need Active Directory and cloud. So that's my minimum. Now, if they do offer that all in that one suite, great. Maybe we can get better pricing. I've probably already vetted that vendor if I'm already using them, and it's nice to have everything in one spot. But if there's glaring gaps, then I can't agree to it. So then I'll probably find something else. So there's a number of vendors out there. There's one vendor in particular that's trying to solve a conditional access problem, and a number of other vendors that are talking about maybe adding that to the product later. But you're probably looking at 18 months at least. And so by the time they get there, how much farther is that other vendor going to be ahead?
I think the biggest red flag is that we've come to the realization that was needed.
Yeah.
How did we get this far without it? It's kind of scary, and how much potential risk is out there as a result. I think that's kind of maybe the inherent challenge in the MSP maturity model too, because I think when you're smaller, you're more willing to take these risks or leave these gaps in place than when you've established a very opinionated baseline and standards for the organization and the clients you support. So that is an interesting challenge indeed.
Yeah, and we're bigger now than we were before, and it's I can't just take on every new vendor, even though it's shiny. And we were pretty early on with IT Glue, as you remember, and it was great going through that process. But we're bigger now, and our security challenges are more, and we have an outside auditor checking for things. So there is a minimum standard that might be harder for a new company to meet, and I might really want it, but unless that security piece is really taken care of, it's not anything I'm going to be looking at. So a number of years ago, we were testing out a data analytics platform that's here, and we were trying it out, had an NDA in place, and all of a sudden another company called me and said, we're testing this as well, and I can see your employee list. Like, what's going on? And so, immediately called that guy, middle of the night, and there was it wasn't anything other than like a username, but there was some data leakage in place. It was enough for me to lose faith in that company, and really question how if that data was leaked. Thankfully, nothing else was. We checked everything, but that's a huge issue, and trust is everything. And so to build that trust back is going to be very challenging.
Yeah, indeed. Well, man, I'll try to wrap this up here before we hit the top of the hour. I think I need more Karl in my life. It's always so great talking to you because you're thinking so broadly, so horizontally across all these issues. Now that you're grown all these years with the organization, it's so good to talk to you. Thank you for your partnership with ScalePad too. I know it's been a fun ride over all these years. It's great to have you on, man.
Yeah, thank you. This is my imposter syndrome was off the charts. I've seen other people you have on here, and very honored to be on here.
No, man, you're one of the smartest people I know. So knock that off first of all, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. This is MSP Confidential. We're here every Friday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Thank you again, Karl, for joining us. Check out the YouTube channel. Lots of other interesting conversations there as well. Next week, I have Jim Smith from Proper Sky. And until then, we'll see you soon. Take care and ciao.
Bye.